Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Future of Sports, the Post-Pandemic Landscape, hosted by the Georgetown University Alumni Association. I'm Kelly Young, Associate Director of Strategic Engagement in Alumni Relations, and I'll be facilitating today's session. I'm thrilled to begin today's program by welcoming our speakers. Dr. Quita Frederick is the Faculty Director and Associate Professor of the Practice for the Sports Industry Management Master of Professional Studies program in the Georgetown University School of Continuing Studies. Jeremy Jacobs Jr., college class of 1985, is the Chief Executive Officer of Delaware North and an alternate governor to the Boston Bruins of the National Hockey League. Zach Leonsis graduated with his MBA from the McDonough School of Business in 2015 and is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Monumental Sports and Entertainment. Today's session is moderated by Monica McNutt, college class of 2011, who is a basketball analyst and commentator for ESPN, as well as a host for Madison Square Garden Networks. For full biographies of each speaker, please reference the bio sheet located within the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. You may also use the questions section of your control panel to submit questions for the panelists. Today's session is being recorded, and we will share the recording via our follow-up email. Now I'm pleased to turn things over to our moderator, Monica McNutt.
Thank you for that, Kelly. Jeremy, Dr. Frederick, Zach, thank you all for joining us today. You got a small taste of what it's like to be sitting on Around the Horn waiting for Tony to get to the questions through that intro that Kelly gave us, but thank you so much, Kelly. All right, guys, we've got approximately 60 minutes, 56 now, to discuss a very interesting topic as we dig into the future of sport. And so let's just jump right in. And I'm going to toss this one actually to you, Zach, to start the conversation. Sure. If you had to guess, how long until, or what might the stipulations be in order for us to return to full arenas?
Oh, full arenas. Well, we're very pleased that actually your question is well timed. Tonight will be our first game back with limited capacity crowds for the Capitals. We've already hosted 2 games for the Wizards at 10% capacity. It's certainly our hope that as we inch towards the playoffs, Capitals should be making the playoffs. It looks like the Wizards could be making the play-in, which is very exciting for us. We're hopeful that that capacity restriction could increase. Maybe to 20%, maybe to 25%. We'll see what the city will allow us. But I think it's everyone's goal, expectation, and hope that we are playing without restriction come the fall. I think certainly leagues and team partners need that. I think that the pace of vaccine distribution has really been quite impressive, actually. I mean, talk about a logistical challenge. It is pretty impressive what Jeff Zients and the team at the White House have accomplished. And based on how it's distributing, I think, we feel confident and good that by midsummer, by Labor Day, we should be close to whatever we describe as herd immunity. But I would just encourage us that at some point we do have to get back to normal at some point. And the fans who've been coming to our games in a limited capacity setting have been happy. I've never seen happier fans to be in our building. It's the sense of return of normalcy. It's the ability to go out and do something fun with your family and friends. People have been, desperate to get back to these old ways. And we're desperate to have our fans back. We couldn't be happier to bring them back. So I'm very hopeful for the fall.
That is a very optimistic answer and certainly exciting for Caps fans tonight. Now, Jerry, I want to swing this one over to you because last summer, Delaware North released a safer Stadia study, excuse me. You were part of initiating that, and it was set to provide tools and guidance on the return safely to sporting events. Can you share a little bit about its findings and what you've seen in the month since fans have begun to return in small capacity?
Yeah, we launched this study, really with the idea of saying there was no protocol, there was no tool for owners of facilities to determine how to safely bring fans back to their venues. And so what we did is we tried to measure the risk of spread and really not quantify it, but relate it. So how does it relate to going to the grocery store, or how does it relate to getting on an airplane? And we engaged some very bright data analytics folks from the university in St. Louis, Miami University, to put together that model and then measure what the impact of different protocols were. So, for example, if you required people to wear a mask, what does that do to the relative risk? If people distance, what does it do to that relative risk? And we were able to show that you could open these venues safely, within the 25 to 50% range, using different protocols. And we shared it with all of our clients. And we've seen, getting back to the opening of stadiums and arenas around the country, every state is different. In Texas, we opened with the Texas Rangers this spring, or this summer really, for opening day in baseball with 40,000 fans. Other venues were at 10 and 12,000 fans. And so it depends on the state, it depends on the governor, it depends on the health department, it depends on whether they like our Safer Stadia project study or not. But it's really a across the board sort of thing. I think in Massachusetts, we're seeing very restrictive measures on arenas right now. But Connecticut, New Hampshire have said they're going to open up 100% in May. So it's hard to say. But our whole idea was just to try and give people a tool that they could use to try and figure out how best to open their venues and keep their fans safe at the same time.
And it was such an important study, and we've seen it. The ideas from it implemented in different places. Obviously, state restrictions vary. But Dr. Frederick, you kind of sit at a very interesting place in this, because I'm sure you have students that are hoping to get into sports management and the business of sports. And now we're looking at this through a lens that none of us could have foreseen. How do you think this directly impacts sort of the next generation of leaders in sports and industry management?
You're correct. I do sit in an interesting seat, and as someone who worked in the industry for actually far longer than I've been on the academic side, I definitely see it through that lens as well as the academic lens. And we're seeing some interesting trends. Number one, our enrollment is actually up. It's up and trending upwards. We've had explosive enrollment since the pandemic set in, which has been interesting because we didn't know what to expect. And amongst the population of students that we are seeing come in, we have those that were already in our program that certainly they have a pre-pandemic mentality. So they had interests that were probably more traditional. And some of them are actually adapting and pivoting in the space. And then we also are seeing students that come in and recognize that there are a number of opportunities in sports that are beyond the obvious ones. I always say the obvious things are college sports or professional sports, even Olympic sports. But students now understand there's analytics, there's gaming, there's esports. So we're seeing students be very adaptive. We're even seeing students that are coming in now who are saying, oh, maybe I actually want to work in a social justice capacity within the sports industry. Maybe I want to work in the DEI space in the sports industry. So the nice thing about young people, and I think we're young at one point, still are in some ways, is that they're very resilient and they're very adaptive, and they typically can go with the flow, because guess what? When you've seen sports without a pandemic, this looks like not normal. If you're coming into the industry and you're very early in your career, this is the only normal that you know. So it's been interesting to watch, and I think it'll continue to be an interesting thing to watch as we see students and young professionals enter the business.
That is certainly encouraging, and it parlays into some things we're certainly going to get to in this conversation. But before we leave this topic, I just want to get this popcorn answer from each of you. What, if any, do you see might be here to stay, even post-pandemic, whether, at least in terms of the arena experience, whether you think masks will be around for a while, whether we're giving up cash? Is there anything that you kind of think, this might be around a little bit longer than we think, Zach?
I think that the transition to digital ticketing has been one that's been happening for quite some time, but now contactless digital ticketing, mobile ticketing, I think is going to be the norm. That certainly will stay. I think you're going to see a lot more in-seat delivery in terms of concessions. That's been something that I think people are just going to become very normalized with. A lot of people actually enjoy going to the concession stand and looking at the menu and seeing the food before they purchase it. Now I think delivery to seats is going to be quite normal. But, I think we'll hit on these trends later in the call, but I just think the pandemic has accelerated a lot of trends even outside of the arena in terms of streaming, gamification, sports betting, esports. It's been an exciting time in our industry, I think.
Jeremy, anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I would agree with Zach. I think cashless is here to stay, and to the extent that the phone becomes the replacement for any point of sale, ticketing, et cetera, it's all going to become much more electronic and seamless. And so yeah, and masks. I think your food service workers will be wearing masks. There's just no reason not to.
Yeah, and Dr. Frederick.
I agree with both of the gentlemen, and I would also add, I think what has been normalized is the luxury experience, because when you think of club seats and you think of luxury suites and you think of restaurants, those are more spacious ways of enjoying a game. I think we'll see more of that, because I think the jury's still out whether we'll get to what we hope to be critical mass in terms of vaccination. And in the absence of that, if we cannot get to those numbers where we have herd immunity, we're going to need to see ways of getting back to, I hate this term, but it's kind of the one that fits, which is a new normal. People may want to still come to games, but they still may want to have some type of safety precautions in addition to masks and ticketless and virtual options. They may also want to have more space. They may not want to sit next to a stranger, but they might feel comfortable sitting with their family and friends. So I think some of the things that we have normally seen as what we consider to be luxury experiences, including having refreshments delivered to your seats, I think those will actually become more common. I don't think they'll be common for everybody, but I think they'll be more common than they have been in the past. And in some ways, they'll lose their exclusivity, but in other ways, I think we'll evolve with it, and there'll be additional things that'll present in the luxury space, and there'll also be new things for people who want a safe but in-person experience, but with additional protocols in place, including social distancing.
Love that. All right, Zach, you sort of teed it up. We're going to go from here to one of the hottest points of the industry right now, whether it's kind of a hybrid. I put the two together because they're both heavily electronic. That would be esports and, of course, sports betting. We've seen a number of national platforms give direct shows, talent, reporters assigned to the explosion of sports betting. We know that Capital One Arena is opening a new sports book in the facility. What do you think is the cause behind this boom in sports betting?
Well, if we start with sports betting is something that we originally got turned on to as operators in the professional sports world by a company called Sportradar, who had been operating for a long time in the European markets where sports betting has been legal, fully taxed and regulated, and normalized. My sister lives in London. She's another Hoya grad. And so we go visit her often. And, it became quite obvious in seeing Premier League stadiums and just William Hill pop-up kiosk and whatnot everywhere that sports betting was part of the culture, that it could be done responsibly and it could be done in a way that protected customers. And so, we look at the American market, and prior to the repeal of PASPA, there are studies out there that say the black market was anywhere between $400 and $500 billion in handle for the sports betting industry. And so that was an underground dark market regulated by organized crime, bookies and back alleys. And who does that really benefit? I think the leagues have always done a great job of ensuring the integrity of our sport, but nothing secures the integrity of our sport greater than regulation. And government officials should have a say in terms of how that's regulated. And when you meet a lot of these sports book operators like a William Hill and you go to their headquarters in Las Vegas or Atlantic City or wherever they may be, these are organizations that run and feel like banks. They have trading floors. These are people in suit and ties. These are people who are leveraging big data to lock out problem gamers, to correlate activity in the betting market with what's happening on the field of play, to ensure that everyone is getting a fair opportunity at the products they're purchasing. So we became a proponent of the legalization of sports betting. The repeal of PASPA has been a little bit complicated because it's required every state to develop their own solution on a state-by-state basis. That means there's no federal or nationwide framework that a sportsbook operator can operate by. It also creates a little bit of confusion for fans as they change state lines in a tri-state area like ourselves. With the District of Columbia, Virginia, and Maryland, you have very different rules that people have to get in tune with pretty quickly. But we're very proud to be opening the very first brick and mortar sportsbook experience within an arena in North America. It'll be nearly 30,000 square feet of sportsbook and F&B experience and sports bar. It'll be open outside of our live game windows. And I think that's something that really excites us, is bringing life to our arena outside of even Capitals, Wizards, or any other events that we have at the building. Everyone thinks of our building as one of the busiest in the entire country, but outside of the live game window, it's pretty quiet with the exception of our offices. This allows us to really light up our building, create a lot more activity in the downtown center, which we're really, really excited for. And it also, gives us the opportunity to activate around non-game days for other live events like NFL Sundays, UFC fights, boxing fights, March Madness. The list goes on and on and on. So we're excited to experiment with this, handle this appropriately, be very thoughtful about the rollout, but also raise the level of experience and make sure it's done the right way here in DC.
It's certainly an exciting time, and I'm glad you mentioned some of the confusion that's still out there. And Jeremy, I want to pivot this one to you because we saw this year that the NFL announced its partnership with Caesars Entertainment, DraftKings, and FanDuel. They've all come to an agreement to become the official sports betting partners. Where do you see this going? I'm just curious because it is still very different state by state.
Well, and full disclosure, we're in the gaming business. We operate casinos in 5 states, and so we followed this, with great interest for quite some time. And Zach touched on all I think the key points. Like, the key word here is legal gambling, right? Legal sports book. The irony in the NFL is, and really truthfully with all sports leagues, including the NHL, we fought it from the league side for a long time. We're opposed to any sort of sports book, with the idea being that it challenged the integrity of the game. But the truth of the matter is there was gaming out there anyways. And as Zach pointed out, it's much better if you can regulate it, manage it, and get some good out of it, as opposed to just having it floating around. But the irony of the NFL is that they had forced the Rooney family in particular to sell or to separate their assets, because the Rooneys owned a casino casino operation in New York and racetracks in Florida. And so they made them separate the family. One side of the family took the football, and the other side kept the casinos. And then literally within 5-6 years, Robert Kraft is buying an interest in DraftKings, and the whole argument over whether, first it started with fantasy sports, which was argued not to be gambling. And I can tell you from the gaming industry, we all said, look, it walks and quacks like a duck. And they say, oh, this is a game of skill. And we said, mean like poker, and sort of where things ended. But in the end, I think DraftKings was told they had to get a license in Las Vegas or get out. So Nevada determined it was gaming. But then ultimately, as Zach said, it became something that was in essence legalized state by state across the country, every state having different rules and regulations. I think the real important thing to know about sports book is that, and Zach touched on this, it's a very mature business. There are very sophisticated players, and they price those bets very, very leanly. So there's not a lot of money to be made in sportsbook itself. The real value for teams and for leagues is fan engagement. So suddenly games that were irrelevant become very relevant, because the fans can bet in time, in real time, in place, in venue on these different games and events. I remember at one point the #1 sports book, legal sports book in the world was women's tennis. because you could bet on the game during the game. And so fan engagement is critical here. Another piece is the ability, they call it the parlay bet, which is a bet where you say, Marchand's going to get a hat trick and 2 penalties. So now that's a very rare and unique bet, and that's where sportsbook operators can make some good money. But the real game here, at the end of the day, is not sportsbook. It's internet gaming. And what's happening is a FanDuel or DraftKings will go to a venue operator. We've seen it in our baseball accounts, and say, I will give you $1 million if you give us the license to run your sports book, and we will provide you a percentage of the revenues as a fee. And really what they're doing is they're getting all the data. All the data is no longer belongs to the client, it belongs to FanDuel or DraftKings. And if you look at their, and that enables them to transfer those gamers from sportsbook over to iGaming. And if you look at DraftKings earnings report, you'll find that their revenues in sportsbook is 7 or 8 times the revenues they have in iGaming, and their profits in iGaming are 7 to 8 times what they get out of sportsbook. So what they're really after is the iGaming business, which is incredibly lucrative. But I think it's a fair deal because I think the leagues are getting that fan engagement that makes the sport all the more relevant and drives up value for sponsorships and cable and over the top and you name it.
Okay, so I have a question, Jeremy, because iGaming is not a term that I was familiar with. This is not the same? This is the same as e-gaming?
No. So esports
wow.
is, the guys playing video games, which,
yes.
I sound like an old fart when I say it that way, but that's what it is to me. But no, iGaming is when you go online and you play craps online or play poker online.
Okay, all right. Well, that's actually very interesting. So, Lakita, I do want you to kind of follow up there. I know you've spent more time in the space than you have in the academic side. Could you kind of foresee this from where you were sitting? And I know you've already talked about your students already having such forethinking in terms of the opportunities that both sports books and e-gaming are presenting.
Personally, no. To be quite succinct, personally, no. But I do think our students have foreseen that, particularly more so, I would say, our younger millennials and absolutely Gen Z, because they're natives to the space. They're not digital immigrants in that sense. So I think that it is an evolving space. I think it will be interesting to see how it unfolds, particularly since those who have kind of come into it as their normal see it as an opportunity to pursue our professional roles. I think they're also looking at it from a lucrative space where they're players. When I was at my previous university, more so than since I've been at Georgetown, I had students who were actually aspiring to be professional esports players, professional gamers, and just moving in that space. What I think will also be interesting, though, is when you think about the younger folks, particularly those that are still in college, whether it's undergraduate or graduate, is that when you talk about anything that involves betting, there's going to be some nuances. And academia in general and the NCAA as well will have to adapt, but they're not quick to adapt. So I think that will be something to watch as well, is to see how quickly they adapt, how will they adapt, what will that look like, because they are reaching a tipping point now where they're not necessarily given the option to opt out as they have in the past.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Dr. Frederick. And really quickly, before we do get into specifically esports, as we've seen, and maybe Jeremy, both you and Zach have worked in this space, but as we've seen leagues, NFL, NBA, I'm not sure if the NHL, but I imagine they're probably working on some sort of partnership. I'm curious if we would see collegiate conferences lean in. I very much remember the Don't Gamble Your Life Away video we got every year before we started playing sports. But at the same time, to your point, Zach, it's about this being regulated safely, and so that then it becomes profitable. I don't know if the NCAA or conferences would tackle that. Do you have any sort of thought there, Zach?
I can't speak on behalf of the NCAA, but
of course,
third-party perspective, March Madness is a pretty interesting time. How many years have you filled an out of bracket consecutively?
Oh God, probably since high school, like since I could fill out a bracket.
I mean, brackets are sort of a key component to, I think, the betting world. I think in general, the NCAA has either implicitly or explicitly supported gaming and participation on their games for decades.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jeremy, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, it's an interesting, so just to give you a picture of where I sit, you know, like Zach, I work for my dad, and I have my brother on the other side of me, and my brother is deep into our gaming business, and my dad chairs the NHL. And when, you know, when sports book came out, Dad was saying, you cannot have my product, the NHL product, without paying me for it, right? That's my product. You can't game on that. You can't bet on it. And my brother's on the other side saying, well, they already are. How are you going to stop it? You know, it's, you know, Vegas is already doing it. It's illegal. It's happening in the UK. So I think that I'm not going to take a side because, you know, I'm too Georgetown educated. I'm not that dumb. So, but I think that the reality is that, you know, that the NCAA either can or cannot, or can oppose gaming on their sports, but it's going to happen anyways. And I go back to the reality of what that does to the value of their product, for their sponsors, for their television and cable contracts, for the over-the-top contracts, and that, I think, is where they see the greatest advantage and value. And so it just is. I don't think the NCAA has to take a position, and they will benefit from it all.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so under the umbrella of gaming, we always have this. We have the sports book, but we also have this esports space. And Zach, I just want to make sure folks are very clear, because esports is another one that has grown with leagues and teams and titles and competition. What all is included in the esports space technically? For example, the team that is supported by Monumental.
Sure. So esports and gaming, totally different topics. There's sports betting, different companies, different customers, different players. Esports is fundamentally, as Jerry referenced, professional video gamers, right? Mm-hmm. And so professional video gamers are playing in a variety of different games called titles. I don't call them games, I call them titles. And titles are developed by publishers like EA Sports or Activision or Riot or Valve. And some of those publishers have titles that have tens, if not hundreds of millions of players on a worldwide basis. I first became interested in esports 6 years ago when I heard there was a esport event that sold out Madison Square Garden. And I thought, gosh, I haven't played a video game since high school. I don't believe it. I need to find out what is really happening here. People paid to watch other people play video games? No way. But it was true. And, you know, you get these really incredible online communities of interest that are driving huge engagement metrics. There are some fans and players of games that are playing anywhere between 4 and 10 hours a day. And it's not just because they love the game, it's because esports has created a platform that I would say rivals any of the social media platforms in terms of socialization and community building too. When I was younger, I used to be on AOL Instant Messenger after school to catch up with friends. But kids aren't doing that these days. Instead, they're coming home, they're putting on a headset, and they're playing Fortnite, which is published by Epic Games, an investment of ours. So that's how they're socializing and hanging out. And just like the same way we're interested in watching the best hockey players in the world and the best basketball players in the world because we go, gosh, they're so good, I wish I could play at that level. Kids who are playing video games think the same way when they watch their favorite streamer like Ninja stream on Twitch and pull an incredible move playing Fortnite that maybe they could never dream of pulling off themselves. You know, I also think a lot of people say, well, you know, how could you want to watch somebody else play a video game? Most people are playing video games themselves on a daily basis. Not many people are throwing on football pads and finding 22 of their friends and playing an 11 on 11 football, but we all watch NFL Sunday together because we love football. So I think there's serious engagement, and people understand that when they watch a player, they can take some of those moves and try to improve themselves. And the relationship that esports athletes create via Twitch, which is a very different platform than how traditional sports are distributed, really facilitates authentic one-to-one relationships and conversations through keyboard chat, through audio acknowledgement, through unorthodox subscriber packages. It's a brand new frontier of live entertainment. And I found it very interesting because it was a totally different audience than what we saw in the traditional sports world, and one that I thought we could miss if we didn't get a seat at the table at. All of these esports fans are cord cutters or cord shavers. They're not subscribing to cable, so they're not watching our traditional sports teams via regional sports network or through national game packages. So we just want to always be holding a mirror up to our community, creating lots of different products and services that cater to lots of different needs, and obviously growing desires from audiences like millennials and Gen Z as well. And thought esports really matched that very, very well.
So it's funny you talked about the audience though, and it's fitting, Jeremy, the way that you phrased your comment earlier, because I'm just curious if there is any attempt in this space to expand the audience up, or is it one of those things that Zach and I played in high school, and that Jeremy and Lakita, maybe you guys just will never dabble in it? Like, have you seen the growth of it up in terms of expanding the demographic at all, Jeremy, or is this wishful thinking?
Yeah, well, look, I like Zach, we don't want to see everyone else get rich and not us. So, you know, we got into business as well. But I agree with that. I mean, it's amazing, it's staggered. The viewership is unbelievable. The number of I saw the same thing, Zach, when I saw the in LA when they sold out for a championship, and I just thought, my God, what is this? We were involved with Splice, which was an esports franchise before Riot Games went out with was it League of Legends, and they created their own. What's happening is the publishers are creating leagues wisely. Somebody had to put together a league to create competition. We got involved with Splice, and then they didn't get a franchise, but then we sold that, and now we're in a partnership, something called it's Harris Blitzer, which is the New Jersey Devils and the Philadelphia 76ers, and then it was originally Tillman Fertitta's franchise, and he's still in it, and we're in it. So we've got what we think are a fair amount of people that understand sports and professional sports involved, but I don't think any of us really quite gets this one, other than it has enormous viewership. And the real challenge for us has been, we're discovering that, to answer your question, that it is a different market, completely different market. The level of fan engagement is very, very high. The ability for fans to talk directly with players is very high. If you have young kids and you're driving them to high school, you'll hear them talking about these players on the way in. And so, you know, it's real. It's got real legs. I think the IOC just announced they're doing some pre-Olympic tournament as well. So it's beginning to challenge whether or not it should be an Olympic sport. I know that there are universities that have these, you know, esports programs. So it's legitimate. But the challenge is, what we've discovered is, while the viewership is enormous, and it is, it's dispersed. It's a truly global product. And so, you know, you might have, you know, 1 million viewers, but 200,000 of them are, you know, in their parents' basement in Asia, right? And the others are, so when you go to Coca-Cola or Pepsi or somebody and you're trying to sell a sponsorship, it's not an easy target market for them to monetize. But that, I think, is going to change. I think that the thing, it really has legs. It really is going to take off. And, you know, Dick Ebersol always used to say, you know, sports, in essence, is just unscripted drama. And that's what this fits. This is unscripted drama. It has iGaming or it has sports book potential. It has everything that any other pro sport has. So I pay close attention to it, and I think it's going to be here for a long time.
Just as a point of context, I mean, the NHL and NBA are leagues that are over 100 years old, fully developed. Even 40 and 50 years ago, the finals for the Stanley Cup or the NBA finals weren't on national television. right? I mean, a lot is developed quickly. Esports is arguably 10 years old, maybe 20 years old max for some titles, but League of Legends, which is by far the biggest esport in the world, is only about a decade old. So we're still in the early days. I think we've seen, the leaders in esports like Jerry's team, Team Dignitas, which is owned by HPSC, and then our team, Team Liquid, both compete in the NALCS. We've seen revenues grow dramatically. They're still small compared to our major league traditional franchises, but we're still in the quote unquote first or second inning here. We think this is going to have a big ending as we go forward into the future.
It is certainly an intriguing space, but again, I guess, Lakita, there is an abundance of opportunity there, and I know you've already talked about your students are certainly tapped into this world.
I agree with everything that both gentlemen have said, and the two things I would comment on are it is a unique market. It is not the same group of people, and it is absolutely global. I think most sports at this point are global in some nature, but esports is 100% global. It is a different dynamic. And from the academic standpoint, more so than even just the professional, but I think the academics are kind of a preview of coming attractions, is I have now worked at 2 other universities prior to Georgetown. And both of those universities were developing actual esports degrees and or concentrations that were independent of your traditional sport management degrees. And there are a few universities around the country. I think UC Davis is one, as well as Becker College. They actually have not even esports as a concentration or a specialization under sport management. They are standalone degrees. So esports is earning its place even in academia as a separate discipline, sometimes adjacent to sport management, but sometimes not adjacent. And I think that that's indicative of, again, the infinite growth that's ahead, is that they know that people who want to study esports are people who are in that niche market. They're not going to be the same people that want to eventually work for an NBA team. And so I think it is indicative of potential opportunities, both for students who are looking to become professional athletes in the esports space, but also those who want to work on the business side of the esports space.
This is, I like your analogy, Zach, that we're just in the first or second inning of this, because it already seems like it has expanded so much as of late, and there's clearly tremendous upside in terms of places to go. Well, while that represents the less traditional side, I do want to get you all's opinion on the traditional broadcast. I mean, we've now seen a number of companies offer straight to consumer, sign up for our package, ESPN Plus, Hulu, YouTube, NBC's Peacock, Fox Sports, so many others. Essentially, you could kind of make your cable bill back if you signed up for everybody. But in terms of what is driving those subscriptions, is it still football is king, or is it personalities through media? What are the trends that you're seeing in terms of the sports consumers pattern? Zach?
I think that we're very lucky in that live sports is undoubtedly the most valuable programming in the world. Our team brands like the Boston Bruins or the Washington Capitals are unlike any other brands in the world. When Apple unveils a brand new iPhone, they host an event and some people tune in. But when the Boston Bruins or the Washington Capitals win a Stanley Cup, we get 1 million people to show up for a parade. We create lifelong memories, and we fill our buildings typically 41 plus times a year, 82 times if you count our away games. Very, very difficult to do with other brands. And these are brands that I think, stick to be multi-generational, right? If you're in New York, you grow up a Mets fan or Yankee fan, a Jets fan or a Giant fan based on, your family and whatnot. And so that fandom translates into viewership. And if you look at the top 100 Nielsen rated events, I would guess that, 80 to 90 of the 100 events are going to be live sports: Super Bowl, NFC East, AFC East Championship, World Series, Stanley Cup, NBA Finals. So I think any of the major 4 leagues plus Division I college basketball or college football is always going to be highly monetizable. We're going to see these upstart leagues start to get more and more traction as they grow their own audiences. For us, I think traditional media has accounted for, nearly half of revenues, depending on the league that you look at. And so we have to be laser focused on making sure we continue to grow that pie by distributing our programming via a variety of channels, whether it's through a linear partner or an OTT solution direct from the league, or from a network's OTT solution like an ESPN Plus or an HBO Max. But we also have to be cognizant about, same thing with esports, serving people who don't have cable and making sure we create fans from our youngest consumers. It really bothers me when I think about someone under the age of 30 thinking the only way they can watch a Capitals or Wizards game is by going to a bar because they don't have cable themselves, right? I think that's a fundamental issue that we have to solve. And it's something that I think the NBA and the NHL are very proactively, considering on their own, because we need to be relevant with our youngest customers, no matter how they want to digest their information and their video programming. So streaming is here to stay. Streaming is only going to grow. It is going to impact the regional sports network world as we know it, I think in the not too distant future. But ultimately, choice is good. Choice is good for consumers. There probably is a unbundling on the horizon, and inevitably there will likely be a rebundling to create those economies of scale and value for customers again.
Before you chime in, Jeremy, I do want to prompt our audience. Please feel free to send questions via the question box. We will get to those here shortly. I apologize for my dog. And Jeremy, please take it away, and I'm going to go on mute. Yeah,
no, it wasn't that long ago that the iPhone was more an idea than a real device. And I can remember being at a conference where Zach's dad was on the panel actually, and they did one of those questions that they always do, which what's the next big thing in sports? And as usual, a bunch of panelists said the usual, like, oh, soccer. Soccer's the next big thing in sports. And then eventually we got down the line, and Zach, your dad said this, and he held up his phone, and he said, this device will connect us to our world. It will change the sports world entirely. And he went out, and I remember thinking, I don't know about that. That's out there. And then literally within 5 years, he was absolutely, as we know, spot on correct. And it changed everything. It really did. And what's happened is professional sports, again, going back to that quote about it being unscripted drama, professional sports is the ideal product for that device because people have to be connected now. When you're involved with the game, when you're a fan, and in many cases we're almost tribal about it, we want to know now what's happening, what just happened, and we want to be able to see it as soon as we can, or whether we can watch it live or not. And so what's happened is this relationship between the PDA or the iPhone and sports has become symbiotic, and the platform as to how we get it, that'll keep changing, that'll keep evolving, but it's really dramatically changed the value of our content that we provide those devices. Now I can tell you on the other side, very interesting, like we're in an interesting stage right now. I went to the baseball openings this year and met with all my clients, and many of these ballparks haven't seen a fan for 550 days. I mean, literally, they've been shut down for 550 days. We were afraid that our point of sale wasn't going to turn on, or the glycol systems weren't going to work. But it was a long time to have no business. And so as they turn on, they're now, the average MLB franchise lost about $150 million last year, and they'll probably lose another 150 this year. So they're strapped, they're struggling, and one of the key sources of revenue for them is their cable television contracts. And the Sinclair, which bought all of Fox Sports networks from Disney, was a highly levered deal when it happened, and then went into the pandemic. And so Sinclair is a question mark right now. And so that source of revenue is also a big issue for these professional sports teams. So, in one way, the reliance on that revenue source increases the riskiness of the business overall. When you have to rely on the viability of your partner that heavily, it's a little scary, especially in today's environment. So some other things to think through, as Zach said, I think the whole world is going to look for some way to diversify that risk, spread their risk around, and that's another reason to spread it out and break it up, and go with different over-the-top providers. And for me, it's a real problem because I can never remember a password, let alone 10 of them. So I'm never going to be able to watch any of these games.
Relatable, Jeremy. Oh, so relatable. Completely relatable.
Yeah,
wow,
very interesting.
That's a lot to think about. And of course, Sinclair comes with its own strategy and notorious penny pinching and so on and so forth. So that is a lot to think about. Lakita, I don't know. I mean, I keep spinning the questions to you in terms of what your students are thinking, but that's not, of course, your only area of expertise. But I mean, you've been in the industry on the team and league side as well. But I don't know. There's so much to mull over in terms of the consumption.
There is a lot to mull over, and it's hard to know where to start. With this particular topic, though, it definitely reminds me of the time that I spent working both in Division I college athletics as well as for a couple of professional teams, in the sense that it was bundled. It was part of normal cable, and as we all know, and I'm a consumer as well, we are now all shifting more towards subscriptions, and subscriptions allow us to curate content to our specific liking, and then of course, big data is following that information so that they can further direct consumers in one direction or another. But when I look upon the questions, because it's kind of got my little cheat sheet here, what I really think about is the fact that it is becoming more personal, it's becoming more intimate. People are allowed to follow not just a team or not just a sport, they're now able to follow an athlete. They're able to follow these more, I guess you might call them micro brands. They're not really micro brands because they're not small, but I choose that terminology because they're brands within brands. Like LeBron has his own brand within the Lakers. LeBron has his own brand within Nike. LeBron has his own brand within the NBA. And so people are able to follow, and subscriptions allow people to do that, whether they're following leagues, whether they're following conferences, whether they're following an actual player. So I think it does allow them to curate in that sense. And also, I would just add that I never thought I would have an excuse to talk about my dissertation, nor did I want one, because I was glad to have it over. But I did study the trends that shifted towards subscriptions because my topic was about the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl's viewership was in a steady decline. It actually remains in a steady decline. But the trick is, it's not declining literally. It's declining in terms of traditional viewership. People are not watching on television. But if you look at the totality of numbers and bring all of those subscriptions together, or you bring all of those streaming services together, you'll notice that they didn't go away. They just shifted. The way that they digest sports shifted. And so that's the moving target that all people have to adapt to. And I use the term moving target because it really is a moving target. Marketing was the area that I worked in, and you're trying to now, instead of come up with things that attract your consumer, you're trying to figure out where's your consumer at. You're trying to meet the consumer where they are, because the consumer gets to choose where they want to digest, where they want to follow. And so it's interesting, it's evolving. It's gonna be, as I said on many of these questions, the pandemic has really, I'll just add real quickly, has really created transparency.
Yeah.
The thing about the pandemic, holistically, is it forced us to stay still in new and different ways. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, the lives we were living were distracting, not necessarily in a bad way, but we had distractions, we had engagement. And as a result of that veil being lifted, we now get to see some of the shifting dynamics in a very transparent way that we didn't necessarily see before. And so that's why I say it's constantly evolving, because these were things that were already happening. But now that we have the veil lifted, as well as the added dynamic of an actual global pandemic, that's expediting things that were already unfolding anyway.
Lakita, that is such a poignant observation, and I really do want to get you guys' thoughts on the elite level of athlete empowerment we've seen this year in terms of athletes and leagues using their voices to acknowledge areas in which we can be better as a society, for one. another. But we did get some really great questions, so I'm gonna jump into some of these. And Kelly, I don't know if you listen, we might have to reschedule a half an hour to get to some of the stuff because we're not gonna cover everything. But Jeremy, excuse me, this one actually goes to you. Are there data privacy issues with iGaming?
Yeah, I think there are. It's something to be legislated on, you know, but really the privacy issue, you know, we have protections in law, but what's happening is using that data to convert. What the question that I was referencing is whose data is it? Who owns this data? Because when a team assigns or licenses a provider and they give that provider ownership of that data, they're giving up enormous value. We're talking to teams in Ohio, you know, they're lobbying to do much like the Leonsis did with their property in terms of getting a skin for professional sports franchises to have in-venue gaming. And if we can aggregate that data, you have an even more powerful and valuable asset. But if you allow the third-party provider to take it, then the team is sort of separated from that data. They can't control privacy. They can't control anything. And so that's where we're focusing a lot of our energies. But yes, privacy is a big issue in all of this equation. And there are laws designed to protect it, but as we know, there are also people that spend a lot of time finding a way around those laws, and so it is and will continue to be a big issue.
Oh, that's a great question. This one is for you, Zach, and I think actually Lakita just talked about a lot of this. With the direct-to-consumer products in many ways cannibalizing, ooh, what a word, the broadcast and cable bundling, do you believe that teams and leagues will be able to get the same or more revenue they are getting from broadcast and cable networks?
Well, I think that cord cutting and cord shaving is problematic for the entire cable industry, and particularly for the RSN business for a variety of reasons. Jerry touched on some of them. I do think that cord cutting and cord shaving is going to stabilize at some point. I think there's still always going to be a pretty solid subsection of fans out there who like cable, who have no interest in dropping it, who aren't price sensitive and are going to maintain that. So I see really the development of a cohesive and symbiotic ecosystem where we have OTT, direct to consumer, and linear bundled programming being delivered simultaneously on a non-exclusive basis. And you'll pay a lower wholesale price on the cable model, and you'll pay a higher retail direct to consumer price for a subscription. Now the question will be, on some of those OTT subscriptions, do they get bundled on their own? Are you buying an entire league pass or just a team pass? Are you buying multiple teams in your local market? Are you buying multiple leagues? Are you buying leagues and other programming? ESPN Plus, The Zone, at some point, probably HBO are going to be bundling in their own live sports alongside the other programming that they have. So that's the fun part, though, and that's where being an entrepreneur is great. We don't want to be a risk-averse company. We want to be in the forefront of innovation. I still think that, like I mentioned, live sports rights are the most valuable pieces of programming out there. And so it's just a matter of how it's monetized, not if it's monetized.
That's a very thoughtful answer. Yeah, the stabilization certainly is coming. Dr. Frederick, this one is for you. Any thoughts on the emerging issues related to college athletes' rights to benefit from their name, image, and likeness?
Wow. Ooh, that is an interesting question. It is a profound question, and I have lots of opinions. Some are rooted in my personal opinion, some are rooted in my professional opinion. This is an issue that has been bubbling for decades. I mean, quite literally decades. And what is happening again is we are seeing power shifts. We are seeing the power shift from the organizations such as conference offices, universities, and the NCAA itself. It is shifting to the athlete, and in this case, it's a student athlete. And the fact that we have state governments that are literally calling their own shots independently in the interest of their citizens, which their citizens happen to be student athletes, has forced the NCAA's hand. So when you think of name, image, and likeness, when you think of social justice issues, when you think of student athletes, not just as student athletes, they are now recognizing their own power as citizens, and they are recognizing their own voices, and social media, of course, gives them power as well. When you think about, we didn't have social media 20 years ago, but this was still a conversation. But what social media allows people to do is go straight to the source. A lot of these topics are nuanced behind the scenes amongst those of us that work in the industry. But now the public is being pulled into these conversations, and the public is being pulled into the conversations, and the public is picking sides. So it's been really interesting to watch, because I think what we're seeing is student athletes recognizing that they may or may not have a professional sport career when they graduate. But conversely, if they're not finishing degrees, or if they're not properly developed and groomed while they're undergraduates, they may or may not have a profession when they graduate. And so all of these things are intersecting, and all of these things are intertwining in such a way that, again, they are not only gaining power, they are owning that power. They want to be given the best opportunity to maximize their potential, whether that's licensing on their own names and their own rights while they're still students, knowing that the industry is making literally billions of dollars on their backs without assuring them a degree or assuring them that they have a professional career. And I think they also know that their mental health is at stake, their professional being is at stake. And for many of them, not all, but for many, particularly when you're talking about your revenue sports, you have a lot of student athletes who are coming from challenged socioeconomic backgrounds, and that's just factual. And so these are opportunities that they see as a way out for themselves and for their families, and they want to be able to protect their interests in a more defined way. And so, as I've mentioned before, the NCAA is not quick to change, but in this particular instance, their hands are being forced. There are about 15 state legislatures that are pushing forward on the NIL issue, whether or not they got on board, and they got on board. They're still figuring out what it's going to look like, but their hand was forced. And the same thing with social justice. The social justice, of course, is a part of a larger national conversation, but we no longer have the luxury of ignoring it. The thing that I have always been defensive about in conversations offline is that as long as I've worked in sports and I've worked for teams or college college athletic departments, we have always had engagement in social justice and social impact and community relations. I don't think they get enough credit. The difference now is they're getting not just credit, they're getting the public's attention, and they're able to, again, harness that power in a new, a different way. And it's a lot. As I said, I could go on and hopefully have it gone in too many different directions, but it's refreshing from a personal standpoint. I think it's very refreshing. From a professional standpoint, there's a lot to be determined.
Yes, I echo those sentiments for sure, Dr. Frederick. Okay, guys, it is 1 o'clock. I knew this was going to happen, that we were going to have this great conversation, and it would be so many things in our notes that we didn't have an opportunity to get to, but we do want to honor your time. Jeremy Jacobs Jr., Dr. Lakita Frederick, Zach Leonsis, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us, for dropping your gems of knowledge, both your experience and your hopes as the industry moves forward. I guess to sum it all up, I would say it's an exciting time to be creative and lean into the new platforms and opportunities we have to engage with and through sports. So thank you all for spending so much of your time with us and being so candid and honest. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
See you guys.